Hello and welcome. I'm Uday Pratap Singh and you're joining us on NewsX World. Let's take a quick look now at some of the top stories we're tracking for you this hour. Israel's army chief has said the country will respond severely to rockets that were fired from Lebanon. The Prime Minister of Lebanon has warned against the risk of being dragged into a new war with Israel following the strikes. Hamas say they are reviewing a U.S. proposal to restore the Gaza ceasefire following intensifying attacks from Israel. Reports suggest that Enclave's only specialist cancer hospital has been destroyed, with the Ministry of Health in Gaza calling it a heinous crime. Five people have been killed and several others have been injured in Russian strikes across Ukraine. President Zelensky's forces have also struck Russia, leading to reported injuries amidst ongoing U.S. calls for a ceasefire. U.S. President Donald Trump has revoked the legal status of 530,000 migrants from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua and Venezuela. The move, which is effective from April 24th, cuts short a 2-year parole granted under the Biden administration. Elon Musk has held an unprecedented top-level meeting at the Pentagon as he continues his campaign to cut the U.S. federal government. Musk also has called for prosecution of an official leaking what he calls maliciously false information about the visit. The top diplomats from Japan, China and South Korea have met in Tokyo as the East Asian countries seek common ground on security and economics. Japanese Foreign Minister Takeshi Iwaya has said the meet comes at a turning point in history. Sudan's army has retaken key buildings in central Khartoum, including the presidential palace, after promising full liberation. The military continues to pressure the rapid support forces who have withdrawn from some areas, though the battle is not over. Flights have resumed at Heathrow Airport, with full service expected on Saturday following a full shutdown. Police say the nearby substation that led to the closure is not believed to be suspicious. The economic impact of the closure is predicted to be in the hundreds of millions. And our big story this hour. Top diplomats from Japan, China and South Korea have gathered in Tokyo on the 22nd of March to discuss regional security and economic matters amidst rising geopolitical uncertainty. Hosted by Japanese Foreign Minister Takeshi Iwaya, the meeting included Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi and South Korean Foreign Minister Cho Tae-yul. Iwaya underscored the gravity of the current international situation. This meeting, the first since 2023, focused on critical issues such as North Korea's nuclear weapons, trade, and laying the groundwork for a future trilateral summit. While Japan and South Korea, both key U.S. allies, view China as a security challenge, Iwaya is also set to hold individual discussions with China and South Korea, including high-level economic talk with Beijing regarding Japan's seafood import ban related to the release of Fukushima wastewater. Joining us at this point is Ross Feingold, political risk analyst. He's joining us live from Taipei, Taiwan. Thank you very much for speaking with us today. Let me begin by just asking you about what all is on the agenda of this keenly watched meeting.
There's a number of foreign policy, trade policy, and security policy issues that are on the agenda. One issue is clearly North Korea. North Korea's continued research and development of nuclear weapons and the other provocative words or actions that North Korea takes. So that's certainly going to be high on the agenda. Another issue is trade and the growing trade protectionism that is emanating from the United States, but is followed on by retaliatory tariffs in other countries around the world. It's probably something that the three countries could agree on. They don't want to see the global trade regime devolve into tit-for-tat tariff wars. And then the other issue is just how to maintain dialogue between the three countries. Can they get their three leaders together in one room? And can they find common ground on a broad agenda of issues?
Right. It's very interesting, of course, that, the three countries are meeting because there have, of course, been outstanding issues. There have, of course, been issues that the three countries have not been on the same page over. Is there going to be common ground then found after this meeting? Will the elephants in the room also be brought up?
Yeah, there might be some common interests that could come out of the meetings. But I'll tell you, the funny thing here is Japan's foreign minister has changed multiple times over the past 4 or 5 years. So has South Korea, and South Korea is currently without even a true president because of the impeachment proceedings going on against Yoon Suk Yeol. So the only person who's been in the job continuously is Wang Yi. So it's kind of ironic that China's, they have three people in the room, but the only person with job stability seems to be Wang Yi. He's been their foreign policy or foreign minister for a number of years already. So from China's point of view, it's, they're probably saying, I'll talk to South Korea and Japan, but I don't know if my counterpart is going to be there for very long. And for China, that would be an honest approach to take. They just can't rely on what South Korea or Japan's foreign minister says because they don't know how long they'll be in the job.
Yes, Ross, also I have to ask you, is there word of a future trilateral summit happening between the three countries? Is the ground being laid for that?
Certainly, I think there's a willingness from the three countries to have a leadership summit, probably more so from China than from South Korea or Japan. South Korea and Japan, they also have to be concerned about the U.S. reaction to the possibility that China, Japan, and South Korea's leaders would have a summit. So I think China wants it. I think Xi Jinping wants it. They'll have to talk about details, starting with where would it occur. They'd have to pick one out of the three countries. So that's certainly already going to create some sensitivities and difficulties just picking the location. And then they'd have to work on the agenda, keeping in mind that for these kinds of leadership summits, usually the three sides would talk well in advance about what they will agree on so that when they actually get in the room and they issue a joint statement, there's no surprises at that point. So what's going to come out of such a trilateral really would have to be agreed to in advance, and that's going to take a lot of work from working teams from the three sides.
Another sticky issue is, the Japanese seafood import ban. Could that come up as well?
Well, what would be given in return? If China's going to remove the ban, they're probably going to expect something from Japan in return, and it's not clear what Japan at the moment really has to offer China by way of some inducements. So that's a challenging thing. I don't think China is going to give it away for nothing unless the Chinese side decides that this would be a gesture of friendship towards Japan that we could live with without anything in return in the immediate future. Very, very difficult for China to make that decision, but it's possible that they would, and then they would try and get something in return down the road.
All right, Ross Feingold, thank you very much for joining us with your perspective on that story. Moving on now, the Israeli military has reportedly struck multiple sites in South Lebanon on Saturday after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ordered dozens of terror targets hit in response to cross-border rocket fire. Israeli military stated the IDF struck dozens of Hezbollah rocket launchers and a command center from which Hezbollah terrorists were operating in southern Lebanon. Lebanon state media has reported that 2 people, including a girl, were killed in the attack on southern Lebanon. This came after Israel had already threatened to hit back. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz has said previously in a statement that they cannot allow fire from Lebanon on Galilee communities. He also stated that the Lebanese government is responsible for attacks from its territory and he's ordered the military to respond accordingly. Meanwhile, Hezbollah has denied the responsibility for cross-border attacks on Israel. This situation has prompted the Lebanese Prime Minister Nawaf Salam to warn that the country risks being dragged into a new war. A fragile ceasefire that took effect on the 27th of November has been marred by repeated accusations of violations by both sides, but the Israeli warning marked the biggest threat so far to the relative calm it had brought to broader areas. Well, the UN peacekeeping force in Lebanon, meanwhile, has also voiced concern over the escalating violence. In a statement, the UN force said UNIFIL remains alarmed by the possible escalation of violence following the detection of 4 projectiles launched from Lebanon into Israel in the vicinity of Metula and triggering immediate retaliation by the IDF. Well, joining us now is Adnan Nasser, A News correspondent. He's joining us live from Beirut in Lebanon. Thank you very much for being with us live today. Let me begin by asking you about this very precarious situation. How concerning are these fresh developments between Israel and Lebanon?
Well, I'd like to start off by saying more than likely we're not going to see this escalate further beyond the border, nothing further than the Litani River. As you said in your introduction, Hezbollah denies officially being involved or carrying out these attacks, putting the blame on independent organizations to which Hezbollah has denied any close involvement with. However, it's unlikely that these rocket launches would have happened without the support or endorsement or the go-ahead from Hezbollah. Hezbollah has promised the Lebanese government since the inception of the ceasefire that had taken into effect on November 27th last year that it will no longer be involved militarily against the Israelis. However, since then, Hezbollah has said Israel has violated the ceasefire on numerous occasions and that they're not going to leave the people of the South undefended. If they want to they want to give the Lebanese armed forces an opportunity to demonstrate its capability of protecting the residents of the South. And unfortunately, the Lebanese army, from the point of view of the Lebanese, especially living in the southern area of Lebanon, the army has not performed in its duties because the Israelis keep attacking areas that they claim to belong to Hezbollah, but more so than not, we see civilians being killed. So if this were to escalate, I doubt very much that it's going to escalate into a full-scale war like we had seen after October 7th, but the risk of it taking place is higher now than it was before. The Lebanese army now needs to take a bold stand and be more assertive and say that it's prepared to use defensive measures to protect the civilians of the South if Israel continues these strikes.
For now, what is the latest situation in South Lebanon that you have heard from your sources?
Well, my sources tell me that the civilian population is deeply afraid of what's going to happen. However, they want to see some sort of retaliatory measure. Some of the sources I had spoken to, their attitude is one of very courageous. They don't want to show any fear in the face of what they call the Israeli enemy. As you said also in your introduction, if I can repeat it, that the UNIFIL sees this as a precarious situation and they're worried that it could escalate into something into a full-scale confrontation between Hezbollah and the Israelis. And you have to also keep something in mind. Hezbollah, from the onset of October 7th, at the outset, they had said that they didn't want to stop their shelling of Israel's military targets or even civilian targets after Hamas had been part of they didn't want to separate themselves from what they call the unification of the fronts. So is there a chance that this could escalate? I doubt that very much because Hezbollah is still in a weakened situation after the setbacks it had experienced from the war it faced with the Israelis.
Okay, as you said, you're not foretelling that this will, escalate, of course, further. However, do you expect then these, border attacks to continue between both sides?
No, I think there's going to be some international pressure, especially from the side of the United States. You have to keep something in mind. President Donald Trump is prepared to use military force in areas like Yemen against the Houthis, prepared to let the Israelis do what it wants to do in Gaza. But it has, the United States, of course, and President Donald Trump has allies in Lebanon. He doesn't want to he's made a very strong vow that the war will not resume in Lebanon. And he has partners here. He has he's declared a new ambassador in Lebanon. As far as I'm aware, he's of Lebanese heritage. So there's something about Lebanon that's given a special case, and he wants to give the Lebanese government time to de-escalate the situation, and they need international pressure led by the U.S. to prevent the Israelis from taking this any further.
All right, appreciate you joining us, Adnan Nasser, with your perspective on that big story. Let's shift our focus now. Russia has attacked Ukraine's city of Odessa with one of its biggest drone attacks, injuring 3 teenagers, damaging residential and commercial buildings, and sparking fires across the city. The attack comes as the United States is pushing for a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia and hoping to agree on a partial ceasefire that would halt strikes on energy infrastructure by both sides. Hours after Trump spoke, Russia launched a massive drone attack on Odessa. The long-range drones buzzed into the city in several waves, damaging infrastructure, residential houses and commercial buildings and causing multiple fires, officials said. Around 25 cars had been set ablaze at a car repair shop. Zaporizhzhia Regional Governor Ivan Fedorov, writing on the Telegram messaging app, said 9 were also injured in addition to the casualties. Russian strikes on Ukraine do not stop, despite their propaganda claims. Every day and every night, nearly 100 or more drones are launched, along with ongoing missile attacks. With each such launch, the Russians expose to the world their true attitude towards peace, Zelensky said on Thursday on X. Delegations from Russia and the US are expected to resume talks on ending the war on Monday in Saudi Arabia, both countries' officials said, following an earlier round of talks in February. However, the recent escalation has raised concerns once again in the Russian-Ukraine conflict. Well, joining us now live is Gilbert Doctorow, Russian affairs expert. He's joining us live from Brussels in Belgium. Thank you very much for speaking with us today. Let me begin by asking you about what you make of this latest Russian offensive.
Well, there's nothing unusual about it. Even Donald Trump remarked the very same thing when the question was put to him yesterday. There's a war going on, and whatever understandings have been reached between Trump and Putin and Zelensky were a very partial limitation on the military operations. Specifically, both sides have pledged not to attack the energy infrastructure of the other side. In point of fact, just a day after this, Russia's military was ordered not to attack Ukraine. Ukraine attacked the metering station on the pipeline connecting Russian gas into Ukraine in Suja. The Suja is the main town in the territory of the Russian Federation province region of Kursk that the Ukrainians had been holding since last August. They did great damage to that pipeline, and the Russians estimate it'll take 2.5 years to replace it. So this was a major attack on Russian infrastructure relating to energy exports. The Russians have been restrained. They have decided not to take this provocation any further and not to respond in kind, because they do not want Mr. Zelensky to sabotage the peace talks, which is clearly the objective of the strike on Suja. As to the Russian strikes in Odessa, they were all on fair game. The same way that the Ukrainian attack on the airbase at Engels in the Saratov region of central Russia was fair game. Nasty, damaging, but it's a military objective. As you reported about Odessa, you were getting the Zelensky version of it. Let me give you the Russian version of it. They successfully destroyed ships in the port of Odessa carrying munitions. They successfully destroyed caches of arms and weapons in Odessa. When the Ukrainians speak about civilian buildings being destroyed by Russian drones, they are keeping from you the fact that these residential buildings were barracks. They were housing armed men. So these questions are very disputed.
Yes, let me also ask you then, Gilbert Doctorow, looking ahead now, there is another round of talks expected on Monday. What do we expect then? How hopeful are you at some sort of progress? Do you believe a partial ceasefire, at least on restraining attacks on energy infrastructure on both sides, is likely?
I think it's a big mistake to focus our attention on the ceasefire. From the Russian perspective, and I would say now from the American perspective, the objective is two parallel discussions: the technicalities of the ceasefire and the end results of a peace negotiation. Where will it end up? These are going on in parallel. As regards the Riyadh talks on Monday, they are primarily between an American working group and a Russian working group. These are technical talks. They are going to be discussing, for example, the free navigation in the Black Sea. There has already been a case of free navigation in the Black Sea that was about 1.5 years ago. It went on until finally the Russians said stop, because the Ukrainians were not delivering on their side of the bargain. And what will happen now is negotiations between technical people, security people in Riyadh. In the same city, there will be a Ukrainian delegation, and it is reasonable to expect that Americans will be going back and forth between the Russian delegation and the Ukrainian delegation in Riyadh at the time. Is there progress being made? Very definitely. What is the end result? The end result will be a peace in Ukraine probably arrived at in several months from now, but in a context of a reset of American-Russian relations of dramatic scope. The last time we heard the word reset was in 2010, when Barack Obama said that he wanted to do a reset with the Russians in order to get through the New START arms limitations treaty prolongation. At that time, American policy was led by ideologists. Russia was a pariah state, and you could do business with it only on the few subjects that were of material interest to the United States. The reset that we're about to witness is of a comprehensive nature that we have not seen since the time of Richard Nixon. That takes us back a long way into the 1970s.
Okay.
And the whole time since the 1970s, American foreign policy has been led by ideologists, not by realists. Nixon was a realist, and Trump is a realist. These are new days.
Would you then see these latest attacks, though, as being a setback for peace efforts, or not quite?
Absolutely not. War is war, and these attacks are fair under the rules of war. They are unpleasant, they are damaging, people lose their lives, but that's what happens in wars. Mr. Trump's insistence that this should come to an end sooner rather than later is a valuable contribution. His great engagement with this process is a very important and decisive factor, spelling its likely success. There are no certainties in this world. It may fail, but it has a high chance of success, and I would not be distracted by the ongoing daily fighting.
All right, Gilbert Doctorow, thank you very much for joining us with your perspective on that big story. And that's all the time we have on this broadcast. We will continue to bring you more news and updates from around the world. Stay tuned to NewsX World. It's time for a very short break.